Some of you may remember that some months ago I was going to begin to try to do spontaneous poetry, and I got up to talk about the man who knew nothing. And in the course of talking about Socrates, I gave some interesting fantasies and ended up with Alexander pulling the sword out of the stone. Kind of convoluting different things.
Also.
But, and then at that time, I labeled this series, which it was all totally spontaneous and wasn't intended to be a series, as "It is never a good idea to conquer the world," and began on a series of discussions about Alexander the Great. Because I thought it was interesting how the man who knew nothing, Socrates, taught Plato, and Aristotle was the student of Plato, and Alexander was the student of Aristotle, and Alexander was one of the main figures in the ancient world who set out with the stated desire to conquer the world, conquer the entire known world. And if he got to an area and he found out that there was more than he knew about previously, that unknown became incorporated instead of the known, and he, up until the day that he died, had the intention that he would conquer the world. So I put forth this theory that it is never, I actually made the statement as though it were true, as though I knew what I was talking about, that it is never a good idea to conquer the world, right? I just want to let everybody know right now that I don't know what I'm talking about, and that is just a hypothesis. It is a hypothesis. Maybe it is a good idea to want to go out to conquer the world,
So I can start again?
What's that?
So I can start again? I quit.
Okay. But we're examining the hypothesis that it's not by looking at Alexander the Great. So we went through a number of things. Some of you may have missed them. They're all on video, up on YouTube. Tonight, I just wanted to briefly touch on the, two things. One, because there was all this talk about war and everything like that. So this is not what I was going to talk about. But one of the things that was interesting about Alexander, have you noticed that that some people, when they are in a crisis situation, a dangerous situation, that it inhibits their ability to act, that they respond to fear in a way that you might call panic, or even if they don't feel panic, they just can't function. Whereas other people in a crisis situation, their mind becomes crystal clear. They enter into a realm where they don't feel the fear. There may have been fear that induced this state, but whatever it is in the brain, or what adrenaline, whatever, activates their brain so that they actually can think really clearly in crisis, and time kind of slows down for them so that they can do all these different things. The kind of person that you want on a boat if a storm comes up with 10 to 15-foot waves, because everybody else freaks, and this person goes up on the helm and just takes control. Kind of person you want if you're driving in a blizzard and a snowstorm next to a cliff on a really, really thing, and the one person can't drive. The other person gets in and he loves it, right? Alexander the Great was maxed out on this kind of thing, that in crisis, in battle, from the time when he was a child, when he first went into war as a child and killed his first man, he thrived on crisis. I can't say that he was a man who knew no fear, but he was a man who, in the height of the battle, was at the peak of his abilities. He could understand all these things that were going on, orchestrate his men, look for weak points, and above all, he could look at the ways in which to incite fear in the enemy. Because he knew that as soon as you infected an enemy with fear, it would spread. And he, in his state of mind, was always able to inspire and keep his troops going. He lived on it. He burned his ships when he landed in Asia Minor, so they couldn't retreat. He had 30,000 men, and he went to face an army of hundreds of thousands of men. And he defeated them because he had this state of consciousness that was impervious for him and the people who followed him, creating like a magic aura that retarded fear. and he knew how to inspire fear in others. And he lived in this kind of state, and that's part of the reason why. And in a way, I guess you could say, like, he probably was addicted to it, you know, because for people like that, the difficult periods in life are the downtime, right? If you have that kind of state of mind where you're crystal clear and you're thinking, you know, and you just, you know, boom, feel like on top of the world. Then when you're down in the mundane things, especially if an emotionally complex background like Alexander did with his mother Olympias, who slept with snakes and had a very difficult relationship with his father, and his father was a, you know, not exactly, you know, a loving father who was a good role model. His father was a, you know, somewhat of a psychopath, Philip of Macedon. So, you know, it being quiet, you know, downtime, quiet time for him was not exactly the best time. Best time was out in the thrust, in the throes of battle. So, let me see. What I was going to talk about tonight was the women in Alexander's life. And, you know, it's like, so I can't remember exactly when I started, but I think it's been about 5 minutes. We don't like to go too much over that. But I'll just throw them out real quick. Because the reason why I'm late tonight was because we got off late from Bernie, because I had to consult with Roxana. Are you all familiar with Roxana?
No.
All right, good, because then Roxana was Alexander the Great's first wife. When Alexander went in and you know, went into Asia and had an initial battle where he defeated Darius's troops and conquered Darius's wife and daughter, and then went on. Darius fled. Darius tried to make deals with him. You know, give me, like, I will allow you a certain amount of land, and you know, and you can marry my daughter if, you know. And Alexander said, I don't need that. I'm already controlling the land, and I already have your daughter, you know. But he treated them very, very well. And they traveled with him. And he was kind of thinking, you know, if I can get together with Darius and we can do this thing, and I am proclaimed the ruler, I can cement this, just as my mother and father cemented the relationship between Macedon and Epirus. I can cement the relationship between Persia and Macedonia and Greece, you know, through our marriage of our families. So he kept them along. He treated them very well. He left them at Susa and went on then on his way to conquer the eastern parts of the Persian Empire and then eventually go into India. And on the way he came to Bactria. Bactria is a fascinating country, interesting to look up. But in there was this guy named, I think it was Pallas, who had a beautiful daughter who was one of their chiefs. Alexander went to fight against him, and he saw this girl, Roxana. He was like, at that particular time, maybe about 29 or 30 years old, and she was 13 or 14. And he fell in love with her instantly. And there was a number of battles. This guy was a mighty war chief, and eventually leading to them being up there in this fortress called the Sogdian Rock, and Alexander defeated him, but he wanted to marry his daughter, and he granted his clemency, and this general became one of Alexander's generals, and he eventually made him a satrap in India. But he married Roxana, and you know, there was a political aspect to it, but this may have been the one thing where Alexander actually really had a sort of romantic urge too. But you know, like, these were tough mountain people, you know. Anyway, he did all of his thing in India and stuff like that. We might talk more about that in the future. And you know, he came back, and when he came back to Susa, then he held a big, huge wedding festival. He'd already married Roxana, but this was to cement and make one the Greek world and the Persian world. And he married the daughter of Darius. And not only did he marry the daughter of Darius, he also married the daughter of Darius's cousin, who was the daughter of Artaxerxes, or maybe the wife of Artaxerxes, the previous empire before. So he was doing double duty now to try through marriage, because this is the way a lot of royalty and people work. If they want to unite, you know, different dynasties, Queen Victoria is a big example of it, you know, is cement the thing through intermarriage, make it all one family, right? So he married these two Persian women, the two princesses who were of the royal line and were part of the unity of all the Persian Empire, them having gone through all these. And not only that, but he forced his 30 top generals to all marry Persian women too. He ordered them all to marry Persian women and said, we are the pioneers of a new race. We are making Persia and Greece and everything one. Okay. So those were his 3 wives. One of them was Roxana. One of them was the daughter of Darius, and the other one was part of the royalty related to Artaxerxes. And then 3 years later, he went down to the coastline in Babylon. The priests of Babylon had warned him that the signs weren't good. He shouldn't enter Babylon. Lots of bad things happened there. As you know, Donald Trump would say, it was a disaster. You know, horrible things. You know, yeah, it was huge. You know, his best friend, you know, who had been with him through all these things, died, and then, you know, he was in a state of distraught. And then he went out, and then he got sick. He got a flu, and he was dead within a week. The world was shocked. Right? Roxana was shocked. She had a baby, Alexander IV, little baby Alexander. She had the other 2 wives killed. When Alexander's generals, who did not have the same vision that he did, started dividing up the empire, the Ptolemies taking Egypt, and you know, the Sassanids taking an area, or not the Sassanids, but the Seleucids, and then the people back there. Well, Alexander's mother, Olympias, one of the women in Alexander's life, was still back there in Macedon. She saw to it that Roxana and little Alex got safely taken back to Macedon, where she could try to protect them, because this little Alex was the rightful heir to the entire empire that Alexander had conquered. But he was only a baby. Alexander died, I think it was in 323. Olympias did her best in the things, the battles that went on, because the time's up now, the battle that went on between all these different generals, you know, dividing up the Hellenistic world. And this is what we'll have to look at when we actually ask the question and look at the results. Was it a good idea for Alexander the Great to try to conquer the world? Anyway, in terms of his own family, Olympias succeeded in the political battles, but once Alex started to get of age, there was another house, another family, another guy who was actually had the power as the head of the Macedonian area. Well, he had Olympias and Roxana, and Alexander's son were executed in 310 BC, 13 years after Alexander died. So when the kid was about 14. So, and then and Olympias was killed at about the same time. So that was the end of the women in Alexander's life.